Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Grace, and this is the KMG show for Monday, February the 15th, 2021. So, the Trump impeachment fiasco is over, and Trump, well, he wasn't impeached because they need 2/3 vote in the Senate. And 7 Republicans decided to vote for the impeachment of Trump. I hope they're feeling very secure in their states. Perhaps the only good thing that came out of this was the by now infamous interview of Trump's lawyer by a young woman on CBS-N, where she is reduced to speechlessness because the lawyer points out several times that she has, let's say, ceded the ground in her interview. Oh, yes, the Democrats cheated. Oh, yes, the Democrats made up evidence, but it wasn't really very much, was it? Which leads to righteous indignation from the lawyer. And again, well, I would prefer to have good-looking people rather than ugly people on television. Shouldn't there be some minimum standards for intelligence? I don't know, perhaps that's too much to ask for these days. Let's look at Jim Kunstler's column this morning. In their latest act of degeneracy disguised as virtue, the progressive wokesters of Washington failed again to nail that old orange coonskin to the wall. Rather, they only embarrassed themselves in the effort, even as far as submitting faked evidence. You think that there would be some penalty for dishonoring Congress like that, but Representative Eric Swalwell has for now just skated for submitting doctored Twitter posts to the Court of Senators. Watch now as some wokeness-inflamed D.C. prosecutor is enlisted by the lawfare beagles to charge former President Trump with a catalog of crimes under the city's ordinary statutes. They'll get a conviction pronto in a local D.C. court for sure, considering the town's demographics, and then the appeals will drag on well into the next ice age. In the meantime, as long as he remains healthy and evades assassins' bullets, Trump will go after his antagonists in Congress like a mad dog toward the 2020 midterm. Swalwell had better learn to code, or maybe his talents are more attuned to hackery. The impeachment loss, which was predetermined by simple math, seems to have only driven Nancy Pelosi crazier, perhaps because there are no more traps she can lay for the ex-president, or maybe because her manager's strategy was revealed to be so shamelessly dishonest. Now she must turn her attention to the woke agenda, which she may sense will only accelerate a cratering U.S. economy. Things like the inane Green New Deal and open borders and disabling what's left of the American oil industry. Good luck with your to-do list, Nance. And Kunstler continues, Biden, rumored to be president, or at least regarding himself as such, has been proclaiming the wish to unite the warring tribes of America. He may say so, but he doesn't really mean it, not one little bit, and everybody knows it. Every executive order he's issued his first month on the job is designed as much as a slap in the face to more than half the country as it is an actual policy goal. He's only succeeded in demonstrating that progressive wokery is a badly manufactured pseudo-reality based on vengeance fantasies and the wish to coerce the people who didn't vote for him. This played out dramatically last week in a telephone parlay between Biden and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis over the governor's refusal to lock down his state. The world-famous Dr. Fauci was also on the call, in which Biden threatened to curtail American citizens' travel to Florida by road and air. Since an offshoot of COVID-19 policy has been to drive a huge demographic exodus from the economic failing states of New York, Illinois, and California down there. He also threatened to withhold federal funding to Florida and deny the state access to COVID-19 vaccines. Fauci chimed in, Governor, do you want to be responsible for reinfecting the nation? Truth is, we don't even know how effective current vaccines are against the UK strain. DeSantis told Fauci that he trusted his own state health authorities over financially incentivized federal officials. The conclusion of the conference call went like this, and there is going to be profanity here. How much do you stand to earn from these vaccines, Dr. Fauci? And Joe, if you continue with this course of action, I will authorize the state National Guard to protect the movement of Floridians, DeSantis said. Address me as Mr. President or President Biden, he said. I will not, and you can go fuck yourself, DeSantis said before hanging up. Now that got right to the point, didn't it? And consider this was not just Citizen Joe Blow mouthing off to an alleged President Joe B, but the governor of a populous state. And what if it suggests a trend? Another obvious and disconcerting irony in that affair was, of course, that Biden seeks to restrict the movement of people across Florida's borders for fear of spreading new strains of COVID-19, while he insolently authorizes thousands of illegal aliens to cross our border with Mexico daily with no testing for the virus. Could Biden's intentions look any worse? Kunstler concludes, the calls for unity are a dodge. Unity requires broad, consensual reality, not cynically constructed pseudo-realities designed to cancel any notion of the common good, a common culture, or the public interest. Without Trump capering in the spotlight, all you see and hear is the clunky stage machinery of a dangerous mass entertainment. Going forward, the frail and illegitimate Joe Biden is center stage in that spotlight. He's already screwed the pooch on so-called policy in less than a month. But the brutal facts of America's crippled economy are crashing down on him and his woke managers like the brutal facts, like the wrath of history. How long will it be before he gets the hook? This is from Monica Showalter at the American Thinker. Somewhere out there, there's an amazingly sinister story to be told about what happened in the series of events on January 6th leading up to impeachment. Because fresh after the slapdash, failed second impeachment of President Trump, the New York Times has withdrawn the rawest element of its story, the anonymously sourced claim that Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick was killed by one of President Trump's supporters who hurled a fire extinguisher at him. Trump, recalled, was declared a murderer for it, with Trump's legal exposure questioned for it, as USA Today reported. Here's how bad that New York Times retraction was, as reported by Red State. If you search for the original New York Times story today, you find the following note now at the top. Update. New information has emerged regarding the death of the Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick that questions the initial cause of his death provided by officials close to the Capitol Police. Julie Strong at American Greatness has been aggressively pursuing this story for weeks, and 2 days ago she published a column that noted efforts by media outlets, including the New York Times, to slowly back away from narrative created by the early reporting done by the New York Times, and acknowledging that the cause of Sicknick's death was still undetermined. That's the rawest element thus spewed in the impeachment fiasco that Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick was murdered by President Trump's supporters with a fire extinguisher. Revolver has an account that Sicknick was alive and well as the riot went on, and creepily enough reported dead before his death happened. His family was taking calls from the press about it, and at the time they had every reason to think he was alive. If that's true, something really sinister may be going on. And Jason Bryan sent these to me. 5 killed at Capitol Hill riot is a lie repeated over and over. Unless you've been living under a rock, you heard from so many politicians that 5 people were killed on January 6th during the Capitol Hill riot. That's a lie. Casualty number 1, Ashley Babbitt, cause of death, unknown, autopsy, unavailable. Casualty number 2, Officer Sicknick, cause of death, unknown, autopsy, unavailable. Officer Sicknick's death has different accounts in the mainstream news. This is very odd. Why are no media organizations asking for his autopsy? Is his political usefulness in the fact that he adds to a body count they wanted to run up for political points? Again, where is the autopsy? According to reports, Officer Sicknick's brother had spoken to him the night of the riots. He texted me last night and said, I got pepper sprayed twice and he was in good shape. Said his brother Ken as the family drove toward Washington. Apparently he collapsed in the Capitol and they resuscitated him using CPR. But the day after that text exchange, the family got word that Brian Sicknick had a blood clot and had a stroke. A ventilator was keeping him alive. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have to be resuscitated with CPR, are you going to be going home that night and texting your brother that you're fine? Like CPR is something a normal person just bounces back from? Oh yeah, I'm fine. I just think there's possibly some questions here. Casualty number 3, Kevin Greeson, cause of death, suspected heart attack, autopsy unavailable. I wasn't able to find Kevin's autopsy. I did, however, find a curious link that is behind a paywall. No other info out there about him other than a statement from his wife. Casualty number 4, Benjamin Phillips, cause of death, suspected stroke, autopsy unavailable. I looked everywhere for photos of this guy and found nothing. Here's the local news report about Benjamin Phillips' death that really didn't go into any detail. Again, if anyone had found him laying on the ground, where are the photos or video? How close was he to the action, or did he die miles from the Capitol? We'll never know, but it's a convenient +1 for the body count. Casualty number 5, Roseanne Boylan, cause of death, unknown, autopsy unavailable. Like the Ashley Babbitt situation, this is a bit odd. First off, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of cameras at the riot. Everyone was filming what was going on. Second off, People.com and a few others reported that she had been allegedly trampled in the mob. A video on YouTube seems to have been attributed to her being stepped on, but it is only 20 seconds long and doesn't show anything. In fact, someone is just yelling, she's dead, without any evidence or the camera showing anything. How would he know she's dead? Wouldn't you start CPR right there? I searched for their local news, and the story gets more interesting as nobody has given the family a cause of death. Think anyone in the mainstream establishment media is looking into this at all? Well, you know, I said last week I wasn't going to pay all that much attention to the impeachment because it was stupid. But then I started seeing references to faked evidence presented by the Democrats, and I thought, okay, I'll just round up a bunch of stories about faked evidence. And what did I find in the mainstream media? Nothing. Nothing. Oh, it's not important that the Democrats faked evidence? Well, I guess they were, on the right side. So, their heart was in the right place. This is from Fox News 2 days ago. Impeachment aide says graphic accidentally included fake blue check on tweet shown in trial. Accidentally. An accidental Photoshop. A senior impeachment aide said that the inclusion of a fake blue checkmark verification on tweets that were presented at the Senate trial was an accident. The tweets showed comments from Jennifer Lynn Lawrence, who was retweeted by former President Trump. The 2 tweets that were exhibited included blue check marks next to Lawrence's name. Blue checks show the user's identity has been verified and also connote a certain status. The final graphic accidentally had a blue verification check mark on it, but the substance of it was entirely accurate. Jennifer Lynn Lawrence tweeted, "I've never been verified on Twitter, so why did my tweet used in the fact-free impeachment include a verification badge? I'm assuming Democrats faked it like they're faking the whole case." Representative Swalwell, why did you add a verified badge to my tweet in your presentation? And then there is the confusion, perhaps deliberate, between cavalry and cavalry. That is to say, cavalry meaning troops on horseback, and cavalry. And Fox News informs us, according to the Gospels of the Bible, is the site outside the walls of Jerusalem where Jesus was crucified. Swalwell mispronounced a cavalry as cavalry while reading her tweet and proceeded to claim on February 10th, this was not just any old protest. President Trump was inciting something historic. The cavalry was coming, and he was organized. Lawrence wrote, "I don't do horses okay. I'm from New York. I'm not in the army either." So either use of the word cavalry would have been pretty stupid. It's a wonder Congressman Swalwell didn't pick up on it. I guess he was too busy making clear that everyone knows that God is a woman. Yeah, that happened too. Steve Watson at Summit News writes, Democrats were caught Wednesday using fake evidence during their impeachment clown show and were forced to withdraw it, proving that they don't care about the truth and only about trying to punish President Trump. Impeachment managers, led by Representative Raskin, charged that following the Capitol storming on January 6th, Trump called Senator Mike Lee by accident when he really meant to speak to Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville. Impeachment manager David Cicilline said he dialed Senator Lee by accident, and Senator Lee describes it that he had just ended a prayer in the Senate chamber. Cicilline then charged that Trump asked Tuberville to make further objections to Biden's election vote count while Senator Lee stood by. It soon emerged that the entire claim was false when Senator Lee confirmed it never happened. Quote, statements attributed to me moments ago by the impeachment manager, statements related to the contents of the conversations between phone calls involving Trump and Senator Tuberville were not made by me, were not accurate. As Lee shouted at him, Raskin admitted that the claim was fake and agreed to withdraw it. Yeah, not a big deal, apparently. Not a big deal. Certainly the media doesn't consider it so. Let's go to the chat. Don from Beyond says, yay, Florida. Brandon Smith, hello to you. Chogogan 666, Palcaso 88. He wasn't convicted, you mean? Right, yes, he wasn't convicted. Don from Beyond, viral joke of the day, COVID equals a flu d'etat. Palcaso 88, KMG, is Victoria getting snow? There was a huge dump of snow here over the weekend. And streets aren't plowed in Victoria and the sidewalks aren't cleared, probably because in an average year, there's, 5 days or less of snow, which leads to problems such as the snow melting. And it's 37, 38 degrees outside now and raining. The snow melting and the sidewalks becoming deadly. That is just a mild exaggeration. I walked to the grocery store for some food, save on foods, last night. And I walked that would have typically taken me between 10 and 15 minutes to 30 to 40 minutes because I did not want to smash my head on the concrete. So I was moving at about 1 mile an hour or half that speed. It's even worse today. I understand why the roads aren't plowed. They don't have the equipment. I do not understand why business owners do not clear the sidewalks in front of their property or the provincial government. Sort of reminds me when I lived in San Diego that they don't have storm drains in that city. And in January, when San Diego gets the most rain of the year, I remember getting off the bus and walking the last 3/4 of a mile or so to the radio station I worked in San Diego. And it was pouring, and the water rose to the level of the sidewalk and then spilled onto the sidewalk and kept rising. And the water reached my shoes and flowed over my shoes, and then reached my pants and then started crawling up my pants so that they got past the knees. And I thought, this is great. It's 6:30 in the morning and my day is ruined already. Okay, what else do we have here? Goober Remover says new gun regulations in the USA warrant mention. My dog, DeSantis, says Jay Miller. Fort Sumter, Florida, says Chogoken 666. The President of the United States believes that he has the power to restrict movement in Florida, that Florida has to lock down, so perhaps it can join New York, Massachusetts, and New Jersey they've all been such, California, all been such tremendous successes. Oh, let's hear from Governor Andrew Cuomo. When you come up with conspiracy theories or this disinformation, then the worst thing you can say to someone who lost a loved one is maybe it didn't have to be. Maybe there was a government issue. This is the governor who forced thousands of infected people into old age homes where they infected the patients who died in the thousands. Cuomo later denied that he had made this order. He had it removed from the New York State government website and is now continuing to lie about it, notwithstanding that his communications director a few days ago admitted what had happened, said that her administration had froze because they were terrified of criminal prosecution. This stuff that's coming from Cuomo, I know it's an overused word, but I think appropriate in this case, sociopathic. Okay, let's see. Do I want to talk any more about this stupid impeachment? Oh, let's talk about Mitch McConnell. His nickname, of course, is the Turtle, or Cocaine Mitch. I think it'd be better to call him the Weasel. This is from Christopher Bedford. At the Federalist, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell got a load off his chest with his speech closing out Friday's second failed impeachment attempt against former President Trump. Unfortunately, however, he also put a load on the back of Republicans. That speech you will see in 2022 campaigns. Who's responsible for that quote? It might surprise some. It wasn't Donald Trump Jr. or Representative Matt Gaetz. It was Senator Lindsey Graham, a moderate, hawkish Republican, not up for re-election for 6 whole years. I would imagine if you're a Republican running in Arizona or Georgia or New Hampshire, where we have a chance to take back the Senate, they may be playing Senator McConnell's speech and asking about it as a candidate, Graham said on Fox News Sunday. And I imagine if you're an incumbent Republican, people will be asking you if you'll support Mitch McConnell in the future. McConnell voted against impeachment, but no, we had to get a long lecture from him about, oh, yes, Trump and how wicked he is. And I don't know, inevitably something about civility, decorum, the Constitution. Nancy Pelosi is upset. This is from Tom Pappard at National File. Immediately following President Donald Trump's second Senate impeachment acquittal, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made a surprise visit to the House impeachment managers and revealed her rage at the decision to the media. Initially, Pelosi walked to the podium and began gesticulating wildly as she damned the Senate for acquitting President Trump. Quote, "What is so important that the political survival of any of us that is more important than our Constitution that we took an oath to defend? What we saw in that Senate today was a cowardly group of Republicans who claim they have no options because they were afraid to defend their job," unquote. You know, there's a conspiracy theory out there that Nancy Pelosi believes that she can become president. When she talks about, oh, our jobs are as nothing to us. Nancy Pelosi has been in the House of Representatives for how many decades? But she is almost 80 years old and shows no sign of going anywhere. She's clinging to power as a limpet clings to a rock. All righty. And, oh, yes, decorum and, violence being bad, except if it's, Black Lives Matter or Antifa violence. And that's not really violence. It's a coming together against injustice, iniquity. Don Serber writes at his blog, Dana Milbank of the Washington Post posted a column encouraging a riot if Donald Trump is acquitted. The headline said it all. If Republican senators acquit Trump, they will own the violence that follows. That headline is not political rhetoric. It is an invitation for Democrats to riot because the media will blame Republicans. The column ended. The Washington Post's Karun Demirjian in the Senate chamber during the opening of the COVID-restricted trial reported that several of Trump's fiercest defenders in the Senate didn't watch the video Raskin played of the January 6th insurrection. Senators Rand Paul of Kentucky, Rick Scott and Marco Rubio of Florida, and Tom Cotton of Arkansas were suddenly immersed in paperwork. 44 of 50 Republicans voted to declare the trial unconstitutional, and 11 even voted against the bipartisan trial rules. They could avert their gaze, but could they shut their ears to the blood-curdling shouts and chants of the mob as they rampaged through the seat of American democracy? When Democrat rioters chant obscenities and yell "pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon," it does not curdle the blood of the media. That is because the media is not just in the Democratic Party. The media is in the by any means necessary wing of the Democrat Party. And by any means necessary is a cry for violence. And that is exactly what the Washington Post headline means. This is not an emotional reaction in the heat of the moment. Milbank wrote the column 5 weeks after mostly peaceful protesters stormed the Capitol. I'm going to be talking about political violence a little later. James Burnham's The Machiavellians and his consideration of Georges Sorel. Oh, let's talk about what Ace of Spades calls let's see if I can get this right, the North American Man-Boy Lincoln Association. Yes. Yes. And Steve Schmidt. Oh, I didn't know anything about this Weaver character and his predilections, even though people who worked for the Lincoln Project were involved, were being groomed by him. And then he trotted out the Kevin Spacey defense. I'm gay. Well, no, really. Apparently, Schmidt, as a young man, adolescent, had been touched by a Boy Scout troop leader, which is relevant to Weaver's depredations. How exactly? I was looking up Schmidt, and I was thinking, has this guy ever won a campaign? Because he's a hotshot campaign manager, and I was looking. I'm not finding any victories there. Victor Davis Hansen writes in American Greatness, over the last 5 years, the pathology of Trump derangement syndrome has been widely described. It was more than a chronic disease and was often characterized by an array of rapidly advancing symptoms of deterioration in reasoning, emotional stability, and personal ethics. More practically, often the deranged Trump hater found in his odium a cover for all sorts of prior personal intemperance and careerist dissipation. Loudly hating Trump, it became a passport for excess, private and public, and a sort of preemptive insurance that excused or rather greenlighted smears, slander, and personal misdeeds. For over a year, the theme of the Never Trump Lincoln Project was the organizers' professed superior morality. They had it, most others on the right did not. Only a select heroic few of the Republican Party would dare to break ranks to end the danger to the country posed by the supposedly moral inferior Donald Trump. Forget Trump's economic, domestic, cultural, and foreign policy record that had belied critics by its success, despite historic opposition, investigation, denigration, and obstruction. No matter, character was king. Again, the Lincoln Project had it. Trump followers did not. The Lincoln Project's band of brothers, initially 4 financially strapped, embittered, middle-aged white male Washington insiders, lectured the country that those happy few, that band of brothers would fight for us. If only they were adequately funded, they could save us from the moral turpitude of 4 more years of Trump. If one were to believe all the sermonizing of these latter-day Elmer Gantries, then their inherent paradoxes, hypocrisies, and selfish agendas might magically disappear. When Republicans hired them, they were conservatives. When they did not, these buskins were liberal to ensure their own continued largesse. They were not just to be Romneyite rejectionists, not just Bidenites, but abettors of the neo-socialist cause of Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, and the Squad. Money was the prime impetus to the project. Again, we were supposed to forget that some of the Lincoln Project luminaries were flat broke, who cared that others owed huge sums in back taxes with no apparent way of repayment given their own reputations for failed campaigns and expensive but otherwise mediocre consultancy. And I'm reminded about Steve Schmidt when he was working for John McCain in a senior campaign position, that it was I guess McCain and others were upset that Sarah Palin was getting so much media attention. Sarah Palin was young, well, relatively pretty, sexy, if you will. I don't think she was qualified to be a vice presidential candidate, but never mind that. In any event, the vice president is exactly as powerful as the president wants him or her to be. And this is how it works. You choose a vice president, there's several days of stories, and suddenly, we're terribly interested in the vice president, and then the vice president is forgotten. But John McCain and his people, this was too much. So Schmidt and others in the campaign started leaking against their own vice presidential candidate. How petty can one be? Hansen continues, after November 3rd, we learned that co-founder of the Lincoln Project, John Weaver, was a sexual bird of prey. He had leveraged his newfound Lincoln largesse and influence as quid pro quos for his own sexual predations, with little apparent regard for the age of his targeted young male victims. This sordid fact was apparently known to many of the pre-election sermonizers at the Lincoln Project. It was also known to Karl Rove decades ago, and he spoke about it in public, whereupon he was accused of homophobia. So these moralists lied about their ignorance of their own pederast, and apparently on one occasion, at least one be pedophile in their midst. Only after the election, we learned that Rick Wilson and Weaver in particular were raking it in and largely disguising exorbitant fees in part to pay huge back tax bills. After the election, the project's legal consultants suddenly were shocked by such disclosures and began leaving the now discredited project at precisely the time when it was in dire need of a legal autopsy and full disclosure. The loudest of the moralists, Stephen Schmidt, epitomized the absurdity of the project when he contextualized his silence about the freewheeling Weaver. Schmidt, you see, was a victim himself as he related a long ago purported childhood abuse trauma. And in racialist and chauvinist fashion, as Schmidt left, he announced that he wanted a non-white male to replace him in the almost all-white male partnership. Yeah. Have we heard the last of Steve Schmidt? One would hope so. One would certainly hope so. This is again from American Greatness. Koch proxies threaten to destroy conservative populism. It's by Edward Ring. A recent guest column in the Dallas Morning News offers new evidence that Conservatism Inc. is bent on destroying conservative populism. The piece also underscores the primary streams of money in American politics. Trillions of dollars flow to progressives, billions flow to libertarians, and millions, on a good day, flow into the conservative populist movement. The column is headlined, "By supporting Trumpism, the GOP is in danger of losing libertarian support." Oh dear. With the subtitle adding that many libertarians split from the party to vote for Biden because that would be a perfectly sensible thing to do. The authors are Daniel Smith, an associate professor of economics at Middle Tennessee State University and director of the Political Economy Research Institute, and Alexander Salter, an associate professor of economics at Texas Tech University and a research fellow at Texas Tech's Free Market Institute. But these two professors are not some random intellectuals. They are part of a billion-dollar machine built to produce paid-for ideas. The Political Economy Research Institute was established with seed money from the Charles Koch Foundation, and the Free Market Institute, per a 2016 investigation by the Texas Observer, is largely bankrolled by the Koch network and other conservative interests and individuals. To be clear, the Dallas Morning News column is not an analysis, it is a threat. And the threat has nothing to do with libertarians ever becoming a viable political party, because they won't. Instead, it's about Conservatism Inc., backed by libertarian billionaires, deciding that Democrats are preferable to Trumpist Republicans. You may have noticed that a great many so-called true blue conservatives, including David A. French, now delight in calling themselves classical liberals. Well, classical liberalism is not conservatism. What these people have been telling you is they've been lying to you their entire lives. But it doesn't seem to matter, because conservatism, as David A. French would have it, is all about worshiping mammon. That's what it comes down to. There's really nothing more to it than that. Oh, well, yes, Israel, Israel, Israel. I suppose there's that, and forever wars. Again, let's look at the chat. Something very off about Gates. Yeah. Yes. Oh, we're talking about Dennis Hastert here, a fan of Gladiator movies too, I heard. He also loves Women in Love. Yes, which is a movie, Glenda Jackson, is it? Circa 1970. There's a very embarrassing nude wrestling scene in it. Okay. Florida Congressman Mark Foley, terror of page boys. Yeah. I wonder what percentage of gay Republicans have TDS, says Adam. No. There's a very high component of male homosexuals in Conservatism Inc. Oh, it's not important what people do in private. It's not? Really? Because apparently people can't speak on message boards, on private message boards, without being persecuted. And that doesn't involve the exchange of bodily fluids. I found a good piece from Unheard by Joel Kotkin, who is the executive director of the Urban Reform Institute, and he has a new book coming out. Oh, it's now out, called The Coming of Neo-Feudalism. It's about California. California's in a bad way. He begins, if one were to explore the most blessed places on earth, California, my home for half a century, would surely be up there. The state, with its salubrious climate, spectacular scenery, vast natural resources, and entrepreneurial heritage, is home to the world's fifth largest economy and its still dominant technological center. It is also, as some progressives see it, the incubator of, quote, a capitalism we can believe in, unquote. Yes, the super rich get ever super richer. Perhaps channeling such hyperbole, President Biden recently suggested that he wants to make America California again. Yet before, I should say that, yes, there are California lovers in the United States, and there have always been, long been, California haters. Bob Hope spoke for millions when he described it as the state of fruits and nuts. I don't know, in the past, the rest of America looked on California with a kind of awe, because they have so many natural advantages there, but perhaps these natural advantages were driving people crazy. Kotkin continues, yet before leaping on this particular train, Biden should consider whether the California model may be better seen as a cautionary tale than a roadmap to a better future in the digital age. The on-the-ground reality, as opposed to that portrayed in the media or popular culture, is more Dickensian than utopian. Rather than the state where dreams are made, in reality, California increasingly presents the prototype of a new feudalism fused oddly with a supposedly progressive model in which inequality is growing, not falling. California now suffers the highest cost-adjusted poverty rate in the country and the widest gap between middle and upper middle income earners. It also has one of the nation's highest Gini ratios, which measures the inequality of wealth distribution from the richest to poorest residents, and the disparity is growing. Incredibly, California's level of inequality is greater than that of neighboring Mexico and closer to Central American countries like Guatemala and Honduras than developed nations like Canada and Norway. It is true that California's GDP per capita is far higher than these Central American countries, but the state has slowly morphed into a low-wage economy. Over the past decade, 80% of the state's jobs have paid under the median wage, half of which are paid less than $40,000, and most are in poorly paid personal services or hospitality jobs. Even at some of the state's most prestigious companies like Google, many lower and even mid-level workers live in mobile home parks. Others sleep in their cars. The state's dependence on low-wage service workers has been critical in the pandemic, but it now suffers among the highest unemployment rates in the nation, outdone only by tourism-dominated states such as Hawaii, Nevada, and New Jersey. Los Angeles, the home of Hollywood, now has the highest unemployment rate of the nation's top 10 metropolitan areas, higher even than New York. But that hasn't stopped California from portraying itself as a progressive paradise, publicly advocating racial and social justice. The state just passed a Racial Justice Act to monitor law enforcement, endorsing reparations, although California was never a slave state, and is working to address systemic racism in its classrooms. This woke agenda was taken to a new extreme this week when the San Francisco School Board decided to rename 44 schools because they were named after people connected to racism or slavery, or they weren't. They went to Wikipedia and went nuts, and many of the people blacklisted were blacklisted wrongly, but never mind that. Back to Kotkin. The district's art department, officially known as VAPA, also decided to rebrand because, quote, acronyms are a symptom of white supremacy culture, unquote. And I should have named this episode of the live stream Universal Mental Retardation. Unsurprisingly, changing school names has little effect on the daily lives of minorities. In fact, minorities do better today outside California, enjoying far higher adjusted incomes and rates of home ownership in places like Atlanta and Dallas than in San Francisco and Los Angeles. About 1/3 of Hispanics, the state's largest ethnic group, subsist below the poverty line, compared with 21% outside the state. Meanwhile, 1/5 of African Americans and over 2/3 of non-citizen Latinos, including the undocumented, are at the edge of poverty. By 2015, nearly 30% of Silicon Valley's residents relied on public or private financial assistance. Once a beacon of middle-class aspiration, it has become fragmented and divided, note two leftist researchers Chris Benner and Manuel Pastor, with the high-tech community largely isolated from the broader region, and particularly those parts of the region that are less fortunate. Rather than a capitalism we can believe in, the Bay Area has become a region of segregated innovation, where the upper class waxes, the middle class wanes, and the poor live in poverty that is becoming impossible to break out of. Silicon Valley, as we know it today, has essentially collapsed into feudalism with better marketing. He notes that California is actually losing population, which is incredible, considering how many illegals or undocumented, as Kotkin has put it, that have flowed into the state in recent decades. Californian officials try to cover up these shortcomings by pointing to the huge capital gains tax receipts they receive from large tech companies and those derived from IPOs. Together, these have created an enormous tax windfall estimated at $26 billion that allows the state to enjoy an annual surplus even in hard times. That's partly why, when Governor Newsom recently defended his economic track record, he particularly pointed to the new round of IPOs to assure us that the state's growing billionaire class is, quote, doing pretty damn well, unquote. Something terribly has gone wrong with progressivism when progressive Gavin Newsom, the epitome of wokeness, hey, California's doing great. Look at all the billionaires, and the billionaires are getting even more billionized. This is not progressivism, as I understand it. Kotkin concludes, clearly California is not the avatar of brighter future, particularly in an age of heightened competition from hungrier, more motivated, and less carbon-obsessed places like India and China. Indeed, California increasingly cannot compete, even for most high-end jobs, with American upstarts like Texas and Arizona. So before the state and the president entertains any notion of sensibly exporting its model, California leaders need to embrace the biblical notion of physician cure thyself, and demonstrate that our state is the harbinger of a better future rather than a feudalistic past. Well, Hilaire Belloc pointed out in his book, The Servile State, which is over 100 years old, that slavery is the default condition of humanity. And in his very prescient book, Belloc saw slavery returning through the burgeoning or nascent, if you like, welfare state. What else is UBI? A kind of servitude. Oh, you'll get your $2,000 a month. Forget about having a family or anything like that. Owning a home, you don't need those things. Oh, and by the way, your $2,000 will be predicated on a high social credit score. So don't write mean things on Twitter, even anonymously, because we will catch you. Oh, yes. Speaking of universal mental retardation, this is an official tweet from the European Central Bank on February the 14th. Roses are red, violets are blue. We'll keep financing conditions favorable till the crisis is through. What happened to the adults? Where do the adults go? Oh, and of course the CIA wants to get in on this as well. The CIA tweeted on Valentine's Day, roses are red, violets are blue. Happy Valentine's Day from CIA to you. Yeah. And of course, this led to ferocious ratioing. Matthew at Damn Coffee responded, roses are red, violets are blue. Happy Valentine's Day. We can see you. Brockstar at Brockstar91 tweeted, replying to Glenn Greenwald, roses are red, violets are blue. Happy Valentine's Day. We're sending a drone to you. I see Poya Pakzad didn't want to make a joke and merely pointed out to the CIA, you spent the entire last decade refining torture. JL Dutout tweeted, roses are red, violets are blue. If you got this, nod your head. I'm using my unchecked surveillance powers to watch you. Und so weiter. Let's go back to the chat. Cuomo was Italian for granny killer, says Picasso 88. How did George end up with Kelly Jane? 'Tis a puzzlement. Yeah, I don't know. I thought I was feeling sorry for Kelly Jane, Claudia Conway's mother. And then she appears, a little video segment. She appears cheering her daughter on American Idol. So was this all faked from the beginning? That this is just some sort of plan to make Claudia Conway, 16-year-old Claudia Conway, famous? I just mentioned again that Claudia Conway charged that her mother had put a nude photo of her on a Twitter app. Later she said, oh, no, that didn't happen. Well, who did do it then? This is the dissemination of child pornography, and it is considered a serious crime. Oh, okay. Oh, British American is blackpilling about Trump. No, you consider what he was up against. I think he did remarkably well. Oh, more blackpilling. Head McNext is calling illegals undocumented is utterly laughable, considering that identity theft is the most common crime of theirs following illegal entry. They have documents for days. California is reliant on other states for its water, not a place I'd want to be in 10 years. Of course, I've been, in terms of collapse of civilization, okay, so how much use can be got out of the Colorado River? And the people, up the line there, are they going to continue to send all this water to California, even as the water table continues to decline? Much of California is desert or semi-desert. So, of course, you would just want more and more people in California. Well, no, you wouldn't want that because California is dependent on others for its water. Of course, the water is largely controlled by agricultural interests who get it for a song so they can do incredibly stupid things like grow rice in California. Steve says, yes, California's water distribution system is pants on the head stupid. Indeed. When I read years ago about what Phoenix being the fastest growing city in America to be replaced by Las Vegas or vice versa, I thought, what is wrong with these people? They don't have any water there. Okay, so what else did I want to talk about? Oh, Texas and wind power. I suppose I shouldn't be laughing. More than 2.7 million Texans are without power. This is from the Daily Mail after wind turbines freeze as coast-to-coast winter storm Uri, we're giving storms names now, brings perilous ice, heavy snowfall, and dangerously low temperatures to 150 million people. Windmills are no good. They're simply no good. But that hasn't stopped so much of the West by being disfigured on the land and the sea, being disfigured by these hideous bird abattoirs. Don't we like birds? I thought it was decided that we liked birds. And finally, on this subject, we have this, and just let me bring it up here. It'll just take a second. Here we go. Oh, yes. I already talked about that European Central Bank. Oh, I have never seen the show The Bachelor or The Bachelorette or any of its many spin-off programs. When E had that show, The Soup, formerly Talk Soup, I liked that show because it allowed me, half an hour every Friday to catch up with all of the idiocy coming from Hollywood. But did it come back? I don't know. But so I saw a bunch of Bachelor clips, and this show is stupid and degenerate. Holy matrimony is not supposed to follow some sort of contest. Never mind the fact that it's all made up. Do any of these phony relationships last? Do they even last as long as that season of the show? But apparently, Chris Harrison, the host of The Bachelor, was anointed last week the worst man in the world. This is from Agence France-Presse. Chris Harrison, the host of the U.S. reality TV dating show The Bachelor, has announced he is stepping down after he was widely criticized for comments he made about race. On Instagram Saturday, Harrison said he had been wrong to defend a current contestant who had to apologize for attending a sorority party at a former slave plantation. By excusing historical racism, I defended it, the 49-year-old wrote. I invoked the term woke police, which is unacceptable, he added. I am ashamed over how uninformed I was. I was so wrong to the Black community, to the BIPOC community. I am so sorry. My words were harmful. Harrison, who has hosted The Bachelor since 2002, said that after consultation with Warner Brothers and ABC, he will be stepping aside for a period of time. He added that he would also not participate in the After the Final Rose special. The Bachelor centers on a single man selecting a potential spouse from a group of women who compete for his affections. The current season features its first Black lead in the show's nearly two-decade history, Matt James. Fans of the hugely popular program petitioned for a Black lead last summer as massive Black Lives Matter protests swept the United States following the killing of George Floyd. Current cast member and perceived frontrunner Rachel Kirkconnell, who is a lovely young woman, I must say, has been criticized in recent weeks after photos emerged of her at an Old South-themed party in 2018. Kirkconnell has apologized, saying her ignorance was racist. When Rachel Lindsay, who became the first Black lead on The Bachelorette in 2017 pressed Harrison on Connell during an interview on Extra TV this week, he defended her. He downplayed the photo, saying there was a big difference between a photo taken in 2018 and 2021. Yes, 3 years. What a difference. It's as if the world of 2018 doesn't exist anymore, and I'm only half joking about that. Lindsay replied by saying the photo was not a good look ever. Harrison also accused Connell's critics of being judge, jury, executioner, and repeatedly said, "I'm not the woke police." Okay. And poor Chris Harrison. You know, I suppose Chris Harrison is a fairly wealthy man. Chris Harrison could have said, you know, if they're going to sack me, they're going to sack me. But you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to grovel. I'm just going to wait it out until this insanity ends. You know, and then in a few years, if they want to invite me back to TV, fine. If they don't, that's fine too. I'm pretty well off. But nope. No, and guess what? His girlfriend stabbed him in the back. Again, from the Daily Mail, Chris Harrison's girlfriend, Lauren Zima, has now spoken out after the Bachelor host announced he was stepping back from the series. The 33-year-old Entertainment Tonight host posted a short yet blunt statement to her Instagram stories Saturday that addressed Harrison's contentious interview with Rachel Lindsay. In the interview, Harrison defended contestant Rachel Kirkconnell's allegedly racist actions, including attending a sorority party at a plantation in 2018 and liking Confederate flag-themed posts on social media. What Chris said was wrong and disappointing, Zima began her text post. Defending racism can never happen, she continued. But that sentence is stupid. Apparently, it just has happened. Accountability comes first. What's next is learning and growth. And I would have been tempted in Chris Harrison's position to say, I guess you're going to have to learn to get along without me because we're finished. Oh, yes. I become the most hated man in America. And then my girlfriend steps in to jump on my head. So apparently this woman was so terrified that she was going to suffer that, no, she has to put the boot in. What an age we live in. Oh, do we have? Yeah, okay, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Let's talk about intersectionality. Y'all know it. You all love it. More, please. From the U.S. Navy's recent Task Force 1 Navy final report on diversity, the TF-1N pledge. As a key member of Task Force 1 Navy, I will invest the time, attention, and empathy required to analyze and evaluate Navy-wide issues related to racism, sexism, ableism, and other structural interpersonal biases. Oh, ableism. Yeah, I can't imagine why there'd be any ableism in the military, but never mind that. I pledge to be actively inclusive in the public and private spheres where I live and work and proactively encourage others to do the same. It was an old joke from The Simpsons, the Poochie episode, where one of the writers says, isn't proactive one of those buzzwords that stupid people use when they want to seem smart? And there's a pause and he says, I'm fired, aren't I? I pledge to advocate for and acknowledge all lived experiences and intersectional identities of every sailor in the Navy. I pledge to engage in ongoing self-reflection, education, and knowledge sharing to better myself and my communities. See, communities, because we're all intersectional, so we all have several of them. I pledge to be an example in establishing healthy, inclusive, and team-oriented environments. I pledge to constructively share all experiences and information gained from activities above to inform the development of Navy-wide reforms. I mentioned this last week, but there have been a number of stories just in the last couple of weeks which have been forwarded to me in one way or another. And no, That's not true. There's some right-wing troll, and you go too far sometimes. No, it's really true. It is really true. Universal mental retardation. This is from Steve Saylor 2 days ago. Over the years, I've paid a fair amount of attention to the politically correct racist hate coming from USC professor Viet Thanh Nguyen, a Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist, because compared to most of his peers, he is clearly a smart guy. I wonder if he's driven by the urge to play the woke game so vociferously in the hopes that he could guilt trip or bully Hollywood into finally making a movie about his great Vietnamese-American novel, The Sympathizer. Some quotes from Professor Nguyen. Horrendous crimes against Asian Americans have happened recently, and it is right that Asian Americans have spoken out against them. But we can be against anti-Asian violence and not resort to knee-jerk calls for more policing, which is inextricable from the policing of Black and brown communities. Asian Americans need to locate anti-Asian violence as part of a pattern of white supremacy, which also targets Black and brown and indigenous people. Even if perpetrators of violence are people of color, the solution is not to fall back on racist assumptions of our own, but to hold the system of white supremacy responsible for dividing us. I'm tempted to respond to Professor Nguyen. Do you literally believe that white people are magic? This is a serious question. Do you seriously believe that white people have magical powers? That apparently white people, using their magical powers, can force Black people into attacking Asian people? Also, apparently, when some Black person or Hispanic in the United States supports Donald Trump, that means that this person is actually white. Yes, that's just how powerful white supremacy is. Oh, and Nguyen responded, mute button, where have you been my entire Twitter life? Such blessed silence. Yes, everything bad that happens on Earth is the fault of white people, says the professor at the white institution. And then apparently a whole bunch of people were upset with him, but no, I don't want to listen to any of that. Let's see. Saylor concludes, you can see why elites so much want to have the Biden administration and the tech monopolists more strongly censor social media. It provides too level of a playing field. In the past, you'd have to deal with one critical letter to the editor being published a week after your column. But today you, a Pulitzer Prize winner, can quickly be logically, empirically, morally humiliated by scores of internet randos. That is the crime of laissez-diversité. Yes, another model minority. And, oh, yeah, let's talk more about Donald McNeil, because this story gets better. It gets better with every possible day. Jennifer Smith from the Daily Mail. White student from prestigious Andover School claims New York Times reporter Donald McNeil also said racism is over and Black people can get out of the ghetto if they want to after using the N-word on Peru trip. Phillips Andover is what? Considered the most prestigious boarding school in America. The tuition is what? It's over $50,000 a year. And I was waiting to see one of these squealers identified. And here we go. Sophie Shepard was 17 in July 2019 when she went on the trip to Peru. She just finished her senior year at Phillips Andover. It's unclear if all of the other students were from Andover or other schools. McNeil argued with white kids on the trip about racism and used the N-word at lunch. Yeah, that's not an entirely accurate statement. A little context there would be appreciated, Daily Mail. Shepard said it wasn't his worst comment, and he also told her it was frustrating that Black Americans keep blaming the system. McNeil resigned last week after his comments on the trip were shared by a Daily Beast article. It was also emerged that Times executive editor Dean Baquet wanted to fire him in 2019, but the union stopped it. So $5,000 per person for this trip to Peru, plus the airfare. So yes, it's I suppose the group of people on this trip did not look like America, as they say. Now Shepard's a student at the University of Iowa. University of Iowa? Really? So it appears your expensive boarding school education didn't pan out for you, did it? Shepard told the Times in an article published Sunday that the N-word was not the only racist thing McNeil said. According to her, he also said, quote, "It's frustrating because Black Americans keep blaming the system, but racism is over. There's nothing against them anymore. They can get out of the ghetto if they want to," unquote. Shepard said she tried to argue with him, but then he shot back, "This is the thing with these liberal institutions like Andover. They teach you the world should be like this, but that's not how reality is." Oh, snap. She said that he was grumpy, but that she felt sorry for him. There was this atmosphere where people didn't like him. He was a kind of a grumpy old guy. I wonder how much Donald McNeil was paid to escort these young creeps in Peru. Apparently this trip was investigating public health and development in the Andes. That's what it's called. And apparently the kids, the woke kids, were very upset because McNeil took a dim view of the efficacy of shamanism. So, I mean, do these children, they believe in witchcraft? Or if it's Native Indian witchcraft, does that make it efficacious? Steve Saylor writes that apparently McNeil was fired from the New York Times in part for being a fan of Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. Yes, as old-timers recall, Guns, Germs, and Steel was a Pulitzer Prize-winning bestseller for seeming to refute the bell curve. As Saylor wrote in 1997, Jared Diamond's goal is to explain why Eurasians conquered Africans, Australians, and Americans, rather than the other way around, even though conventional social scientists shy away from such a fundamental question out of fear of what they might find. Since random accidents of personality and culture appear too trivial to account for the clash of continents' lopsided outcomes, e.g. a few hundred conquistadors demolished the greatest empires of the New World, this leaves only two possible underlying causes. Either the winners had better homelands or better bodies and brains. Deeming genetic explanations racist and loathsome, Diamond sets out to reaffirm the equality of humanity by showing the inequality of the continents. It's all hate speech now. It's all hate speech. And a final thing from Steve Saylor from the not national news, the murder of E. Lee. Two teens, 15 and 17, charged with homicide and beating assault of woman in Washington Park. This is from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Kamare R. Lewis and Kevin T. Spencer, Jr., 15, were charged Tuesday in Milwaukee County Circuit Court with one count each of first-degree intentional homicide and first-degree sexual assault in connection to the September 16th attack. E. Lee was found severely beaten and unconscious by the pond in Washington Park the evening of September 16th and taken to a hospital where she died from her injuries 3 days later. Lee died from blunt force trauma to the head and suffered other injuries associated with rape, authorities say. Oh, more. Half dozen or more people attacked women in Washington Park last fall, records show. Video from nearby surveillance cameras suggested about a half dozen people were somehow involved in the incident, according to the complaint. Oh, is this going to be like the Central Park jogger case where they'll all be paid? People convicted for this will be paid millions of dollars in the future? Because no, it wasn't me, it was the other guys. Well, apparently the cops didn't arrest everyone involved in this monstrous murder, monstrous gangbang. So those that get sent to prison end up being millionaires. And as they say, the system works. Anthea Turner, or Anthea the Body Turner, I don't know whether that's actual a real nickname for her. That's what Alan Partridge called her. Again from Mail. Anthea Turner apologizes after she was accused of fat and disability shaming for posting meme of obese McDonald's customer in wheelchair berating maskless woman. Turner, 60, triggered the row after posting "Go for it" next to the cartoon image. It showed a face mask wearing overweight woman in a motorized wheelchair. She was holding a fast food bag and berating a thinner, able-bodied maskless girl. One MP called her an idiot, while a disabled child's mother said it was ignorant. Disabled? Well, if obesity is a disability, then it is a voluntary one. Turner's decision to speak out appeared to have backfired with some of her fans who turned on her, claiming the image was ignorant and offensive to people disabled through no choice of their own. What do you mean, no choice of their own? It came hours after she posted a link to a report on obesity being a bigger killer than smoking in England and Scotland. This morning, she said she was sorry for the cartoon, but insisted she had not meant to target people who were clinically ill. Okay, clinically. And Paul Joseph Watson has some thoughts on that. Being fat isn't a civil rights cause. No, it didn't used to be. I suppose it is now, and it's all part of the great intersectionality cavalcade. And I'm looking into the idiot face of Labour MP Jess Phillips here, and I'm going to scroll past that. She had tweeted, "The Anthea Turner thing this morning has just about done me in." I suspect that Jess Phillips MP is the type of woman who uses that phrase, "done me in," roughly 400 times a year. I just wish the idiots would just admit that the wind on their face is more important than my sister-in-law's life when she has chemo. What on earth are you talking about? Stop with the goddamn hierarchy of whose life matters, 3 exclamation points. What does obesity have to do with your sister-in-law's chemo? Spud from Dublin had tweeted, "So the message is overweight people aren't worth keeping safe. Presumably that applies to the ill and elderly. Just to be clear, who is on your list of people that do deserve to die?" Okay. Yeah. So is that all for intersectionality? Or wait, is there more? Oh, here we go. Most at risk, this is from the CBC, first in line. Public health experts say racialized Canadians should be prioritized for vaccines. Community outreach overcoming vaccine hesitancy should be factored into vaccine rollout. Who racialized these people, by the way? Was it white people? But white people don't exist. Intersectionality, that is a tough nut to crack. Two public health experts in Toronto say governments must prioritize vaccinating Black Canadians and other people of color against COVID-19 because the data shows they are most at risk of contracting the virus. Can we see this data? No. No such data in this story. It's just the argument from authority. Now, we know that a great many Black people in Canada, in Britain, and in the United States do not want the vaccines. They don't want them. So could it be perhaps that they are considered to be most at risk of contracting the virus because they will refuse to get vaccinated? In any event, Akwatu Kenti and Ananya Tina Banerjee told CBC Radio's The House that failing to vaccinate those communities will not only put them at greater risk of getting COVID-19, but also increases the chance that the virus will spread more widely. The reason that Black people have a higher rate of positivity or higher hospitalization rates is actually because of social inequities, systemic racism, and neighborhood vulnerabilities, said Kenti, who teaches at the University of Toronto's Adala Lana School of Public Health and chairs the city's Black Scientists Task Force on Vaccine Equity. I could point out, looking back to the Anthea Turner story, that racialized communities are having a tough time with COVID-19? Well, because of weight. Weight is one of the major reasons for this. But no, I suppose if BIPOC people are morbidly obese, that is the fault of white people. Yeah. A nasty story from the Toronto Sun with Joe Warmington. Taking the handles off doors to trap potentially COVID-positive seniors in their rooms was so disturbing that the president of the company that owns the retirement home in Durham region was furious. Now, David Bird, president and CEO of Diversicare Canada, which operates White Cliff Terrace in Cortes, has apologized. We are connecting with residents and family members to let them know what happened, how truly sorry we are, and the steps we are taking to prevent this from happening again. He told the Toronto Sun, "We are thankful no residents were harmed due to these actions, and I'm thankful that this serious incident was brought to our attention." Who is responsible for this? I wonder. Perhaps, the police Durham Regional Police are looking into the matter. Yes, I remarked last week that apparently it seems that only evangelical Christians are willing to stand up against the sanitary dictatorship. Ben Mildred writes in Conservative Woman, Christians Unite Against This Lockdown Madness. The church has endured many a pandemic in its long history. It was on the front line, and most of them provide comfort and care to the sick and dying. The Christian faith has an intimate relationship with death and suffering because our God is no stranger to death and suffering. The church has also endured many a season of house arrest, police states, restricted worship, and forced closures. Admittedly, such things have not taken place in the UK for many centuries, considered to be barbaric practices of totalitarian governments until early last year. Despite this deep tradition of suffering and rebelling against evil rules, the church has had a terrible lockdown. There's barely a church in the country that is not fully signed up to the state's diktat, telling it how to worship God, and barely a church leader who has wholeheartedly and unreservedly condemned the lockdown for the evil it is causing. There is a strong biblical case for resisting lockdown in all its forms. Lockdowns favor the rich over the poor, the old over the young, tyranny over family, and safety over community. None of these trade-offs is one that the Christian faith encourages, and all are causing real and lasting damage to millions in the UK. God is clear. We are not to show favoritism to the rich over the poor, yet lockdown has protected the wealthy at expense of the poor. Only the well-off affluent classes have the work-from-home jobs. The poor are most likely to have to go to work and take the risk of catching COVID. Delivery drivers, factory workers, shop workers, warehouse workers. Not only do the poor face the risk, they bear the economic cost too. The poor have the jobs most likely to disappear. In the Gospels, Jesus welcomed a little child, telling his listeners not to think lowly of the young. Today, decisions are being taken regardless of the cost that will fall on children. They have missed almost a whole year of education that cannot easily be regained. They have been forbidden from play dates and socializing, stopped from playing in the snow by the police, and taught to fear human contact. Young people have been made unemployed in the hundreds of thousands with little prospect of finding a job anytime soon. Romance is on hold, and universities are not but prison camps that the most ardent Puritan would avoid. Children and young people are the least at risk from COVID, but they pay the cost of lockdown. In past times, it was considered the duty of the older generation to sacrifice themselves for the younger. In these enlightened times, this natural relationship is inverted, and children are forced to sacrifice their futures so an old, ill person can live 6 months longer. The dark secret that underpins the lockdown is a fear of death, a festering, thoroughly secular and wholly ungodly desire to live forever. But death is no stranger to Christians. God has said it cannot be avoided, and to seek to avoid it in such a way that brings harm to others is a type of evil in itself. It is a form of selfishness for those at risk to demand an ever-extending lockdown, to possibly extend their own life at a cost of £2.4 billion a day. Unemployment, suicides, and terrible misery for the rest of us. One of the most repeated phrases in the Bible is God saying to his people, "Do not be afraid." But COVID has his people living in fear, cowering in their homes, instead of boldly serving and worshiping him as they should. Christians have no business supporting lockdowns. They prioritize the rich over the poor. The costs fall heaviest on the young. They destroy family life, and they destroy church life. Let's go to lockdown skeptics here. And of course, the latest news that we're hearing from Britain is that the madness might be ending soon. Lockdown madness, that is. But how often have we heard that in the last, almost a year now? This is from Jonathan Barr today. 15 million people vaccinated, time to reopen. Of course, there's a problem with the vaccine, the question of, how many jabs people have got. And the efficacy of one jab, say, as opposed to two. The Telegraph points out that the vaccine data is not quite so clear-cut. 15 million doses have been administered, but out-of-date figures and blind spots in the publicly available statistics make it difficult to assess who has had the jab with complete certainty. And Britain is going ahead with its mad quarantine of people arriving in the country, which they have to pay for. Oh, the shocking backlog of cancer patients. An increase in deaths from cancer is a well-known side effect of the lockdowns, with screening programs and treatments being delayed by hospitals and people being reluctant to turn up for appointments for fear of catching the virus. Turns out 2020 was the worst year on record when it comes to the number of people being diagnosed with cancer, i.e. fewer were diagnosed than at any time since records began. The Telegraph says the backlog of cancer patients waiting more than 100 days has doubled since last year. And response to Jess Phillips, why are COVID patients any more special than cancer patients? But she dragged in her sister-in-law with chemo, and again, she doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. Not every case of cancer is fatal, of course, but prompt diagnosis improves the chances of survival. According to cancer research, there are more than 160,000 cancer deaths every year. Have the young really suffered more than the old? Guy de la Bédouire, he argues that everyone in lockdown is in this together. Everyone has been damaged somehow, and we must now act together in our collective interest of coming to terms with the disease and return to a manageable normality. And before I leave this topic, I am going to look at Alex Berenson, who is truly invaluable if you want to know facts, both safety and efficacy of these viruses. How many people over 85 did Pfizer enroll in its 40,000 person COVID vaccine trial? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. True story. People over 85 account for 30 to 50% of all COVID deaths and are by far the most risk. How do we know the vaccine helps these people? Great question. We don't know because they didn't test for that. Again, from Berenson, if my never before used in humans experimental treatment caused pregnancy losses to more than double in the only group of animals I tested it on, I might think about testing it in some more animals before decreeing it safe for pregnant women. But that's just me. This is the argument from authority again. We've said that it's safe. Well, 5 people? You tested this on 5 people? Now, there's a problem with pregnant women. How much testing did you do with that? No, we've said that it's safe. And the government says that it's safe. And if you express any disagreement with that, then you're a COVID denier. And let's hear from Sean Penn. I have heard some pretty hairy stories about Sean Penn over the years. So perhaps when we get something like this from him, we shouldn't be surprised. This was 3 days ago. Evangelical leaders should themselves be impeached by the Vatican if they themselves don't follow Nikki Haley's lead and clearly state that they should not have followed Satan, Satan, into the bowels of hell. But perhaps they are too busy at sex parties. What? Apparently, Sean Spence never heard of the Protestant Reformation. That just went right over his head. The Vatican has no power over evangelical leaders. None whatsoever. Nikki Haley. We all love Nikki Haley now, do we? I always wondered about her presidential prospects, being a pagan as she is. Would Americans warm to that? I have my doubts. Oh, yes, and seeing as the theme seems to be universal mental retardation, you may have heard that Canada is involved in a spat with the People's Republic of China over 2 Canadian citizens who were kidnapped in China, have been held there for years. Does this mean that Canada is going to get tough with China? No, of course it doesn't. Because if Canada got tough with China, a whole bunch of politicians and PR spivs and others would be appreciably less rich. This is from Robert Fife and Stephen Chase of the Globe and Mail. The federal government is partnering with Huawei to sponsor leading-edge computer and electrical engineering research at Canadian universities, a move critics say threatens this country's national security and economic interests. The National Sciences and Engineering Research Council, a federal agency, is collaborating with the Canadian arm of Huawei Technologies Company Limited to fund the studies. Top universities in the United States and Britain have shunned further research money from Huawei over intellectual property and national security concerns. The federally funded council is putting up $4.8 million for research partnerships that include Huawei. The technology giant would not divulge its contribution, would say only that it is greater than that. Jim Balsillie, former co-chief executive, Research in Motion, and founder of the Center for International Governance Innovation, said he considers it astonishing that Ottawa would put up money to help Huawei obtain advanced technology that will serve to benefit China. I don't know. Does he really find it astonishing? Because if Canada were really serious about these 2 Canadians, both named Michael, who've been kidnapped by the Chinese Communist Party, they would do things like, withdraw their ambassador, close down Chinese consulates in Canada, expel their diplomats, start looking at abrogating trade agreements. But no, none of that is going to happen. I'm going to be moving on to the Machiavellians in just a minute, but let's go back to the chat. Okay. Hello, Professor Pohl. Okay. Hello to you. It was about 2 years ago that Bill Kristol endorsed Nikki Haley. That's her name, Nimrata. That's her actual name. Okay. Chad Chadson, hello to our valiant moderator. Halper says Kev smokes Gitane with the filter snapped off. You can't buy Gitane in Canada. You haven't been able to buy Gitane for decades now. They used to be produced under license in Quebec. And then the federal government insisted on separate tax stamps for all 13 jurisdictions, at which point I believe it's Imperial Tobacco said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. For a while, you could still get Gitane loose tobacco. You can't get that anymore. There's just a relative handful of different cigarette brands that are sold in Canada now. It's a quasi-monopoly situation. Last year, the brand that I smoke, Pall Mall, we're coming back, after COVID-19 or whatever. And it's going to be the same great cigarette. And they sold them in 100 millimeter size. And then they eliminated that. So I was forced to buy king size for exactly the same price. But that's one of the things about living in Canada is you are endlessly ripped off by quasi-monopolies. Anyway, let's get to George Sorel. The function of violence. A great myth makes a social movement serious, formidable, and heroic, but this would not do unless the myth inspired and was in turn sustained by violence. In his analysis of violence, the most notorious and attacked part of Sorel's work, he begins, as in the case of myth, with the narrowed problem of violence as related to the proletarian revolutionary movement. He is, however, seeking conclusions that will hold generally for all great social movements. Sorel was writing some years prior to the First World War, at a time when humanitarian and pacifist ideas were almost universally professed by the leaders of official opinion. International war was going to be stopped by treaties and arbitration, class war by reforms and the internal policy of social peace. Violence was a relic of barbarism, soon to disappear altogether. Ironically enough, in spite of the two world wars, these notions retained their hold in many quarters and are always prominent in the dreams of what the world is going to be like after the current war. In the face of these official opinions, Sorel presents a defense of violence. However, we must exercise care in determining just what he is defending and why. Sorel does not take the ideas of humanitarianism and pacifism at face value. As in the case of any other ideas, he relates them to the historical environment in which they function. Their prominence does not mean that force has been eliminated from social relations. Force is always a main factor regulating society. But under advanced capitalism, much of the force is exercised as if it were automatically and impersonally. The whole weight of the capitalist mode of production bears down upon the workers, keeping them in economic, political, and social subjugation. From one point of view, the humanitarian chatter serves to obscure the social reality. Still more important, the moral denunciation of violence helps to keep the workers quiet and to prevent them from using their own violent methods and strikes and for the revolution. Is it true that overt acts of violence have become less frequent than in many former ages? It is. Is this in all respects an improvement? It is, to the extent that brutality, such as used by robbers and brigands in earlier times, or by the state in the punishment of criminals, has become rarer. Sorel is careful to explain that the violence, he does not mean brutality of this sort. From another point of view, the lessening of overt acts of violence in social relations is merely the correlative of an increase in fraud and corruption. Fraud, rather than violence, has become the more usual road to success and privilege. Naturally, therefore, those who are more adept at fraud than at force take kindly to humanitarian ideals. Crimes of fraud excite no such moral horror as acts of violence. Sorel writes, "We have finally come to believe that it would be extremely unjust to condemn bankrupt merchants and lawyers who retire ruined after moderate catastrophes, while the princes of financial swindling continue to lead gay lives. Gradually, the new industrial system has created a new and extraordinary indulgence for all crimes of fraud in the great capitalist countries," unquote. Burnham comments, similarly, in the case of the modern working class when under the control of reformists and politicians, the frank acceptance of the methods of proletarian violence would threaten all the existing institutions of society. Consequently, violence is deplored by all those who have a stake in existing society. Cunning, in the form of doctrines of social peace, cooperation, and arbitration, is in favor. An occasional act of violence by the workers is comfortably overlooked because it can be used by the labor bureaucrats or a government allied with the bureaucrats to scare the employers to win concessions for themselves and to prove their indispensable role in controlling proletarian violence. Quote, "In order that this system may work properly, a certain moderation in the conduct of the workmen is necessary. If financiers are almost always obliged to have recourse to the services of specialists, there is all the more reason why the workmen, who are quite unaccustomed to the customs of this world, must need intermediaries to fix the sum which they can exact from their employers without exceeding reasonable limits. We are thus led to consider arbitration in an entirely new light and to understand it in a really scientific manner. It would be evidently absurd to go into a pork butcher's shop, order him to sell us a ham at less than the marked price, and then ask him to submit the question to arbitration. But it is not absurd to promise to a group of employers the advantages to be derived from the fixity of wages for several years, and to ask the specialists what remuneration this guarantee is worth. Instead of bribing some influential person, the employers raise their workmen's wages. From their point of view, there is no difference. As for the government, it becomes the benefactor of the people and hopes that it will do well in the elections." Burnham comments, furthermore, the growth of the humanitarian and pacifist ideologies, this effort to hide the force that nevertheless continues operating in vicious and distorted ways to place reliance for rule upon cunning and fraud and bribery and corruption, rather than frankly used violence, is a mark of a social degeneration. It is not only the masses who are lulled and degraded, the rulers too decay. The rulers rule hypothetically by cheating without facing the meaning of rule, and in general economic and cultural decline, a social softening is indicated. We could look at the Biden family there. We could look at the political class in the United States generally. How is it that Nancy Pelosi is worth, what, $200-300 million? How is that possible? How did that come about? Hunter Biden, was he known as some sort of high flyer in business? Well, why does he get invited by the, government of Ukraine, government of China, all these other countries? Could it be because his father was vice president of the United States? When the shocking news about Hunter Biden and his father's involvement in the family business was revealed by the New York Post, the rest of the media, including the Wall Street Journal, decided that it was not in the public's interest to know about this. And after all, who really cares? Who really cares that our politicians are routinely bought off? This social softening that Burnham writes about with regard to Sorrell, it's just simply taken for granted now that our politicians are all corrupt. And I would argue that if it's taken for granted that our politicians are all corrupt, then our political system is very weak indeed, that it would not take much simply to knock it over. I will be coming back to the Machiavellians, George Sorrell, and violence tomorrow, but I'm going to move into talking about rock managers now. Infamous rock managers. Before I do, though, on Friday I talked about Nick Kent's book, Apathy for the Devil, and he mentions when he worked at the New Musical Express that he worked with a man who was one of the assistant editors named Tony Tyler, and it would seem that Nick Kent did not like Tony Tyler very much. I remember Tyler's work from the NME, and I quite liked it. Tyler left the NME in the 70s, and he became a freelance writer. And he wrote a book, and Kent mentions this. Apparently, Kent doesn't like the book. Tyler wrote a slim volume called I Hate Rock and Roll, which I bought when it came out and read, and I quite enjoyed. And it contains a story in it which made me laugh harder than perhaps anything that I have ever written. And I'll tell you the story. So Elvis Presley dies in what was the summer of 1978, if memory serves. Let me just check. No, 77. He died August 16th, 1977. So I should explain that Elvis Presley had an enormous fan base in Britain. Perhaps in terms of population, he was more popular in Britain than in America at the time of his death, and subsequently. But Elvis played all of his concerts in his lifetime, with the exception of just a handful in Canada, in the United States. Now, why is this the case? Well, we know now that, and there's a segue here to what I'm going to be talking about, rock managers, that Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, well, he was what they call a Kentucky colonel. And this is it's honorary. You call yourself a colonel. You're not a military man. But Colonel Tom Parker was not an American. He was an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands. And it is widely believed that the reason that Elvis Presley did not reap the rewards of his enormous British and European fan base was that the colonel was afraid that if he ever left the United States, he would not be readmitted. Well, yeah, Canada. Before 9/11, back and forth between Canada and the United States, it was pretty much a wave through. There wasn't a lot in the way of security. All right. Every year in Britain, a rumor came about that Elvis was finally going to perform there, but it never happened. And the newspapers, they ran the same headlines every year. So Tony Tyler was in the NME offices on the day that it was announced that Elvis had died. And so, okay, they're going to redo the whole newspaper that week, devoted almost entirely to Elvis. And they had all these writers looking at all the various aspects of Elvis's life. But big sticking point was, what is the title line going to be? And so they dragged Tony Tyler into these discussions. And he said, how about Elvis says no to Britain? I nearly fell over when I read that. I don't believe I've ever laughed so hard in my life. This is a joke that needs explaining. The explanation is that the same headline that ran in the British newspapers every year when it was announced that Elvis would not, in fact, be touring Britain for the first time was, Elvis says no to Britain. Anyway, I love that story. Let's talk about Colonel Tom Parker. He was a crook. He was a straight up crook. To give you an idea of just how crooked Colonel Tom was, when Elvis's estate was probated after his death, it was worth $1 million. Can you imagine that? Was it hundreds of millions of records that Elvis had sold? His estate's worth $1 million? Well, Colonel Tom took 50% off the top, which is just like no manager charges that. Oh, he only had one client. Colonel Tom was a disaster to Elvis's career. It was Colonel Tom who decided that, one of the things they decided that when he went into the U.S. military in the 1950s, that he was going to be treated like an ordinary soldier. This is very, very strange because it was simply common practice when you have a famous person in the U.S. military, then this person, they find special things to do. I mean, was the U.S. Army greatly benefited by Elvis Presley's presence in Germany for 2 years, protecting Germany from the communist horde? It was Colonel Parker who decided that Elvis was going to specialize in movies. Now, Elvis made a lot of movies, and several of the movies at the beginning were actually quite good. And then they got worse and worse and worse. And you end up with Elvis singing to a tuna, that sort of thing. More disastrously still, Colonel Tom decided that Elvis wasn't going to record proper albums anymore. He was just going to release soundtrack albums, which got worse and worse and worse. And indeed, by the time of Elvis's famous comeback special, singer special, they called it, his career was at a low ebb. And Steve Binder, the director and producer of it, he actually took Elvis out into the street. He said, do you notice something? Do you notice that no one recognizes you anymore? And he told Elvis that his career was in the toilet. That's the word that he used. And Steve Binder had an idea that we're not going to do it's not going to be like Perry Como show or whatever, right? I want to get you together again with musicians you used in the early days in the 1950s. I want you singing, I want you playing rock and roll. I want you to lose weight, and you're going to lose weight because you're going to have to fit into those leather pants. And this was a time when Elvis decided that he was not going to listen to the Colonel, and it worked out very well for him. Later, when he decided to record in Memphis with Chips Moman, This led to suspicious minds and in the ghetto, and it was a renaissance for Elvis. The Colonel was against this, and one of the reasons that the Colonel was against it was, well, because of theft. Right from the very beginning, the Colonel insisted that if Elvis covered your song, Elvis got a writing credit and 50% of the royalties. Elvis had nothing to do with any of the songs, but the Colonel insisted. And some songwriters like Bumps Blackwell, they were happy enough to give up 50% of their songwriting royalties in order, for the bonanza of Elvis covering one of your songs. But I just cannot regard it as anything other than theft. The Colonel had Elvis associated with Hill and Range, the publishing company, and Chips Moman was having nothing of it. And eventually he said, I'm not signing away 50% of the songwriter's royalties because the Colonel says so. And if he doesn't like it, well, then, Elvis can go away. And this was another example where Elvis, he bucked the Colonel and he benefited greatly thereby. Elvis's final years, of course, were spent mostly in Las Vegas, which was very convenient for the Colonel because he was a degenerate gambler, and pretty much the fortune that Elvis got for playing casinos, it all went back to the hotel because the Colonel simply could not control himself. And yes, he was, I suppose you could consider him one of the worst managers, but there's another, I don't want to sound offensive here, but if one looks at rock managers, they typically belong to 1, 2, or 3 of the following classes. 1, crook. 2, pederast. 3, Jewish. And some of them, like Lou Pearlman. Lou Pearlman was all 3. I mentioned previously that in sync, the band, how much did they, in revenue, did that band generate? $1 billion? Certainly hundreds of millions at the very least. How much money did the 5 band members get? They got $250,000 divided 5 ways. Yes, that's right. That's what they got. When Lou Pearlman was arrested for fraud, he had $300 million in debt. And where did the money go? Where did all the money go? You see, people in bands, particularly boy bands, they're very naive, And, where's the money? Oh, the money will be coming. Well, if we sell a million CDs in a week, or 2 million CDs in a week, as NSYNC did, the money should be here right now. Where did it go? Oh, but Mr. Pearlman, he buys us all these sick threads. No, he doesn't. Yes, he does. You're paying for the clothes. Well, what? No, that's coming out of your money. And I don't think that he's buying these clothes at market rates either, because then he wouldn't get his cut. Would he? And there's also the issue of sexual abuse. How many members of NSYNC or the Backstreet Boys did Lou Pearlman sexually abuse? I suppose we'll never know for certain, but I don't think it's a coincidence that so many members of these boy bands turn out in adult life to be homosexual. I don't really think that is a coincidence at all. Chris Brown, who sold a lot of records and is famous for beating the shit out of Rihanna, he was in a boy band, and apparently he was sexually abused by a male manager, which may explain what we could call his ambivalence about women. That, I don't know, I've seen a documentary about Lou Pearlman, And it is so depressing, because it's the same thing over and over again. That Perlman was physically gross. Oh, but I suppose these boys, get coerced into doing disgusting things with people like Lou Pearlman, because Pearlman's going to make them a star, and their parents are typically on board with this, even though in many cases they got a pretty good idea what's going on. And I suppose there's pity on behalf of the boy band members. Oh, Mr. Perlman, he wants this so much, etc., etc., etc. Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles, he was a pederast and a Jew, but not a crook. He was not a very good manager, though, because one looks at the amount of money that was left on the table because of the deals that he signed. It's just absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. Andrew Logue Oldham, who was the original co-manager of the Rolling Stones, he took advantage of Decca's embarrassment at turning down the Beatles. That Dick Rowe, the head of A&R at Decca, he was desperate for a new teen sensation guitar band, and there were the Rolling Stones, and Andrew Logue Oldham and Eric Easton, the co-manager. They came up with this revolutionary idea, which is, you're not going to own this music. We're going to lease it to you. Also, the royalty rate is going to be much, much higher. That was a very, very good deal, except that they got the idea that they wanted a fellow named Alan Klein to manage them. Oh, and he got involved with the Beatles, and it just led to endless sadness. With regard to Alan Klein, somehow both the recordings and the publishing ended up the property of Alan Klein. Yes, and I have to say that I quite admire Mick Jagger for rallying after the kind of setback that would have broken most people. That you work hard for 7 years, something like that. You become the biggest band in the world or close to it. And then you find out that you've got nothing, that everything you had has been stolen from you. But this is a common story. The most notorious example of this is the band Badfinger, who were from Liverpool, also Wales, which is close. And they got involved with one of the very most notorious managers in history. And it led to them being broke. Well, his name was Stan Pauli, who was not a pederast, but a Jew and a crook. And he involved them in financial investments. Well, his financial investments. This is the sort of thing that happens all the time. Not just to rock bands, people in the entertainment industry that, a check bounced. Or I just got this extraordinary letter from Inland Revenue, or the IRS, saying that I owe several $1 million in taxes. This is a mistake, right? No. Well, how could it not be a mistake? One of the things I pay you for is to pay my taxes, or our taxes. I mean, that comes out first. Well, and then the manager explains that he had an excellent idea for investment. Oh, you would just quadruple your money, or you take $1 and make it 10. Oh, but it was very complicated, and there were setbacks. And one, there's no money, and two, you owe a fortune in taxes. Stan Pauly did a similar trick to that of Alan Klein, was that he approached people who are already being managed and said, you're a sucker. Well, what do you mean I'm a sucker? You're a sucker because you could be earning a lot more money than you are. And he demonstrated to clients that this was true. And so at that point, he had total confidence of the people that he managed. Let's see, I'm going to read from Wikipedia here. In 1971, Pauly was named during U.S. Senate investigation hearings as an intermediary between unnamed crime figures and a New York Supreme Court judge. Most of Pauly's American clients said they were already suspicious of their manager by this point, but the publicity of the hearings convinced several to sever ties with him. In 1972, Pauly negotiated a record contract with Warner Brothers Records for Badfinger, which called for advances to be paid into an escrow account. In 1974, Warner's publishing division filed a lawsuit against Pauly when it was unsuccessful in locating the funds. The legal morass crippled Badfinger financially. Well, they were on Apple. Badfinger was on Apple Records, and Apple Records was a crummy label to be on. Apple Records was essentially the Beatles and everyone else. And there simply wasn't the organization or the time or efforts expended into making Apple signings as big as they could be. Oh, George Harrison is going to produce your record. Oh, when he gets around to it, when he has the time, say. Anyway, Badfinger had hits. They had a string of hits. But again, Warner Brothers, much better record label than Apple. So they get signed and money disappears. So what happens then is the first record that Badfinger makes for Warner Brothers gets pulled from the shelves. It's no longer available for sale. Oh, and Badfinger, or two of the members, Pete Ham and Tom Evans, they had written a song called Without You, which was covered by Harry Nilsson and became the #1 song around the world for several weeks. And this is the sort of thing which normally makes people rich. But it didn't make Pete Ham and his bandmate, Tom Evans, didn't make them rich because everything got tied up with the Stan Pauly situation. They had no money. They had no money, as I say, despite a string of hits and writing a worldwide #1, which later became a worldwide #1 later for Mariah Carey. They were skint. And so in 1975, Pete Ham, he hanged himself. He said that, in effect, he wrote a letter. He said that Stan Pauly is a soulless bastard and I'll see him in hell. Well, things didn't get much better after that. And several years later, 8 years later, Tom Evans hanged himself as well. It's, all the reading I've done about the popular music industry, it's really kind of shocking to be reminded just how much money you can make if it isn't being stolen from you. I recall reading that when Syd Barrett died, the founder of Pink Floyd, who was their lead guitarist, their singer, songwriter, he made one album, a few singles, and then he went crazy from drugs. But several of the songs were on best ofs by Pink Floyd and live albums. At the time of Syd Barrett had made 2 records for EMI Harvest. They didn't sell very well. But David Gilmour was keen that Syd Barrett was going to get the money that was coming to him. And when he died, decades after leaving Pink Floyd, he was bringing in £150,000 a year. Again, it's amazing how much money you have if people don't steal it from you. There's a book about Badfinger. It's called Without You, The Tragic Story of Badfinger by Dan Matavina. I wouldn't, you don't want to read this book, if you're feeling somewhat depressive about life, because it might push you over the edge. So how about the Bay City Rollers? Let's talk about them. And they were managed by they're a Scottish band, and they were managed by a Scottish hustler called Tam Hatton. And Tam Hatton, not a Jew, but he was a pederast, and he was a crook. And the Bay City Rollers, despite having a huge hit in America, Saturday Night, it's a good song, actually, and becoming the biggest band in Britain, somehow they end up with what? Nothing, or close to nothing. And it appears that he sexually molested several of the members of the band, and their band members' lives since the Bay City Rollers broke up. Oh, what? One of them was convicted of being a pedo himself? Yes, the cycle of abuse continues. I don't know. It's difficult. It's difficult to say, what could be done to prevent this sort of thing. I suppose if you had strong-willed parents, you could make sure that any deal was vetted by a lawyer that was loyal to you and not to the management. Because what record companies don't care. They don't care if you get ripped off entirely, as long as they get their slice from it. Don Arden. Don Arden was, of course, Ozzy Osbourne's father-in-law. And despite his very English-sounding surname, his name was actually Harry Levy. Don Arden, not a pederast, however, he was a Jew and a crook. And to give you an idea how crooked he was, he was managing the Small Faces in the 1960s. And the Small Faces were one of the most popular bands in Britain with tons and tons of hits. And again, they had no money because his position was, I'm not going to pay you. And you would think that, what do you mean you're not going to pay us? If you want money, go on tour. It's the same thing that Ahmet Ertegun did with his black acts on Atlantic Records. That, I imagine one of the guys saying, coming in to see him, Mr. Ertegun, I had top 5 hit, and he's talking about 3 hits in a year, So where's the money? You're not getting any money. If you want money, go on the road. Because that's what they call an accepted business practice. Don Arden was famous. He was a big man. He was a violent man. And he was famous for threatening to kill people who he disagreed with. And one of those was Robert Stigwood, the Australian who managed Cream and the Bee Gees. Stigwood was not a Jew, but he was pederast and a crook. And it's the same story over and over again that we see, that the connection between pederasty and popular music, it is extraordinarily strong. Extraordinarily strong. It's made in that satire The Ruttles about the Beatles. Neil Innes wrote the music for it. That there's the Brian Epstein character and tight pants, young man in tight pants. Alan Klein, despite being a crook, he taken very good care of the legacy of the Rolling Stones. I mean, in terms of their recordings and how they were preserved. Peter Grant, who was the manager of Led Zeppelin, and in a Man Mountain, one might say, people were terrified of him. according to Nick Kent, near the end of his life, he felt bad. He felt bad about how he had treated people. I don't know. I've heard him described as being Jewish. He was not a pederast and not a crook. He did very, very well for Led Zeppelin. Very, very well indeed. And the deal that he made with Atlantic Records was similar to the ones the Rolling Stones made with Decca. You don't own our recordings. We lease them to you. Because the way it works in the, where does the money go? Oh, well, there's a charge for this and a charge for this and a charge for that. And I know a lot of, bands, look, our management's bringing us drugs or hookers or whatever. You're paying for those drugs and hookers, right? The parties, that you're paying for those parties. Peter Grant, he cultivated this aura of menace about himself, as Don Arden did. And there was a savage beating after, yes, they hired a fellow called John Bindon as part of the security crew, who was a genuinely scary person. And, I suppose Peter Grant's management, they made a big mistake because a member of Bill Graham's staff was savagely beaten by the Grant camp. And you do not want to get on the other side of Bill Graham. I know a lot of people have nasty things to say about Bill Graham. I thought he was very good at what he did. And there was a story about him that particularly impressed me, that some sort of a concert or festival coming up, and Graham was walking across the stage and he caught his shoe on a nail which was coming out of the wooden stage, and he grabbed a hammer and he hammered it back in, because why not do it yourself? Others would think this, too lowly, but not him, not Bill Graham. Joe Simpson, Jessica Simpson's father and manager. I have to say that I read a story about him and his daughter and the way that he was discussing her body in very intimate terms. It was very disturbing to read. Let's see, Albert Grossman, well, he did a very good job for Bob Dylan at the beginning. I mean, he got songs placed. Bob Dylan's songs were being covered by all these artists, and Bob Dylan was doing, rather well even before his albums became best sellers. Tony DeFries, who was the manager of David Bowie and ran his management company called Main Man, which signed others. John Mellencamp was signed to Main Man originally, and Mick Ronson and Iggy Pop, but his other acts didn't really get a lot of attention. And DeFries, I don't know, is he still alive? I'm going to have to check on this. I mentioned with regard last week that people can buy back their own catalogs, and David Bowie did it, and he paid off Tony DeFries. Now Tony DeFries is still alive, so I'm gonna have to be careful what I say about him. Let's just say that DeFries was noted for excess at a time when David Bowie could hardly pay his band, when he was the number one act, in Britain with Ziggy Stardust, and the band was being paid just practically nothing. When the band broke up, they had some silk shirts and pants or whatever, and no money at all, because Main Man had this enormous entourage, because Tony DeFries wanted to see himself as, the manager, as star. And he succeeded for some time. David Bowie noted that, how come we never played France? We had all these fans in France, it's just across the channel. Nope, never happened. Because Tony DeFries apparently thought, who knows? Who knows why people would make decisions like that? What is there any way out of this? Well, I suggested earlier that I really don't think that it's such a good idea for minors to be involved in the entertainment business. It always, not always, but mostly seems to end up badly for them. I mean, monetarily, even, leaving aside the ever-present fear of sexual molestation. David Bowie decided for the last 20 years of his life or whatever that he was not going to have a manager, that he was going to hire specialists for certain tasks when he needed them. There's lots of people now, I suppose, since the rise of the internet, people ask the question, why do I need a record label? Well, I suppose a similar question might be, why do I need a manager? Okay, so let's have a look at the chat here. Oh, pretty sleazy milieu. Yeah, it's funny. I'm trying to. Who's the British actor's name? Sir Ben Kingsley. That he's a singer, or he used to be a singer, and apparently he was good at it, and there was interest in him pursuing a professional recording career. And I saw an interview with Sir Ben about a decade ago, and he said, well, I'm glad I didn't do that, and I decided to do pictures instead. And I thought, what an admission that is, given how well-known Hollywood is to be sleazy, that, well, at least it's not the record industry. Head McNeck says, my cocaine and hookers just got here. Good night, fam. See you tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. Media Head says, Bijou Phillips was so much of a train wreck that she makes Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan look tame. Yikes. Lindsay Lohan, huh? Peter Grant was into heroin like Page and Bonham, says Hauper. Yeah, Page was also into the occult in an extraordinarily big way. And a lot of people see what happened to Led Zeppelin, the disasters, as being retribution because of this. A drug-dealing pederast, actually. Name the movie. I don't know about that. Let's see what else we have. I'm going to wrap it up here. I think that's it. I was not aware of this pattern, KMG. Incredible. Okay, I think that's it for tonight. I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. What is coming up culture-wise on the show? And on movie-wise, 12 O'Clock High from 1949, starring Gregory Peck. Outstanding movie. The week after that, another movie from the 1940s, Mildred Pierce, on the book club. This week, on Friday, I'm going to be discussing Solzhenitsyn's Between Two Millstones, Part 2. And the week after that, Klaus Schwab's COVID-19, The Great Reset. And next week on Music Monday, I'm going to be discussing Elgar and the Renaissance of English music. And on March the 1st, another sad story about the music business, a big star, Beautiful Losers. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you'd like to make a donation to this live stream, which I could really, really use at this time, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, a donation can be sent directly to me via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I shall leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.